Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're ready for a story. So I've got good news for you. When I was in 3rd and 4th grade, I was in competitive storytelling. Bad news is I never won a thing. It's all right. I love the sound of my voice, and I think you will too. So this should be really, really awesome. Okay, so first, I just want to say thank you to LOA. I want to say thank you to the Executive Council. I want to say thank you to the symposium team. And thank you to all the senior leaders who have taken the time to be here with us and also to listen to this. I think this is a really important story. It's not just a story about a little squadron on a little base far, far away. It's a story for the entire Air Force. It's a story about logistics and how we, not just art of the possible, which I think a lot of folks in the depot are still very familiar with, it's art of making it happen. And that's exactly what we did. So most of the questions that I get, I wouldn't say every day, but pretty darn often are about preparing for the storm. Some of them you ask me, did you even prepare? And that's not such a weird question when you really think about it, because that thing moved in really fast, and that thing is Hurricane Michael. But yes, we did prepare. And we executed absolutely every item of our checklist. And we even went beyond that. We were moving much more quickly through our preparation than we expected. Now, the fighter wing didn't necessarily get everything done that they wanted to, but they did everything they absolutely could. And what we found is that there was actually some very successful things that we implemented for the first time that earned us great rewards. And a few of those things were corralling our fuel trucks to protect smaller pieces of vehicle, or smaller vehicles and smaller pieces of equipment within that corral. Worked out really, really well. We did have to modify that process a little bit when we lost a couple parts of those trucks. Also, MXG was able to park some of their vehicles in a revetment at the end of the flight line. These things were virtually untouched because the wind just went right over them. So although we moved really quickly to respond to this hurricane that was on its way in, we did carry out a lot of preparation that saved not only a lot of money, but a lot of lives. And an important piece to that was the fact that our fighter wing commander decided to evacuate families before Hurricane Michael even became a hurricane. So this thing was forecasted to be a Cat 1, and then very quickly you're like, no, it's gonna be a Cat 2. And then, no, just kidding, it's gonna be a Cat 3. But it was coming at us super fast. And so Colonel Laidlaw said, all right, we're gonna get everybody out of town. And we did that. I left a day after this evacuation had started, and I left a few hours after I had told our squadron that they had to be out of town. And even though we had done all this preparation, I kind of felt like something wasn't right. I just missed it. I figured, you know what, I'm naive. I don't know what these hurricanes are all about. Never ever wanted to live in Florida. Still feel that way. But I figured I just didn't know what I was talking about. But when I got up to Alabama, where my family had evacuated, 100 miles north, and all we had were tropical storm force winds, I watched on the news as this massive thing came ashore, and the eye hit Tyndall directly. So I don't know much about meteorology, but I did know that the area around the storm was the most dangerous. And I knew that since this thing had traveled right over Tyndall, that we had extremely strong winds in at least 2 different directions hit all of our facilities and all of our things. And if there weren't any people that were still in our communities around base, they too had just endured that. So I knew it was gonna be bad. I knew it was gonna be really bad. And of course, what would any commander do at that point? You'd want to go back. The comm was out, so that kind of sucked. Couldn't talk to anybody, couldn't figure out what to do. But eventually, messages started to flow. And 36 hours after the storm, I was able to return. And I was happy to do that. So before I get to those details, I want to talk a little bit about Hurricane Michael itself, because I think it's important. Not so much about this particular storm, but the severity we saw with it. And I think that we all should consider that we're going to see a lot more of that. Okay, so Hurricane Michael was the strongest storm in recorded history to ever hit that part of Florida. It came ashore so quickly that it was first categorized as a 4 because the measurements just simply were not complete. And then after further study was conducted, it was very clearly a Category 5 storm. We just saw Dorian hit the Bahamas. So this Category 5 storm, Hurricane Michael, that hit Tyndall, moved through pretty quickly. As I said, it was moving toward us quickly, it moved across land quickly. It moved through Tyndall very quickly. Had it sat on Tyndall, I don't think I would be here today as the LRS commander. I probably would be shutting down that base. Okay. overasserting my analysis there, but what we should expect is that we're going to see severe weather events like this again. This thing became a hurricane 48 hours prior to it making landfall. It rapidly intensified into a major hurricane just one day after that. So we started evacuating families. It wasn't even a hurricane. It became a hurricane. By the time I was driving north to meet my family, it was turning into a major hurricane. And then by the time it made landfall, just 24 hours after that, it was a Category 5 storm. Before this, that would have been impossible. That's no longer impossible. All right, let's get to the returning to base. What did it look like? Weird, for sure. I drove south on 231 most of my trip, and I can tell you that there was a marked increase in damage as I drove each mile. First, it was power lines that were toppled. Then it was trees that were over major highways. And then eventually I started to see a lot of damage to homes. As I got closer and closer to the community, I saw there were homes that were completely washed off their entire foundation. They were missing. They were gone. Other homes that were a little bit more fortunate, they just had their belongings strewn about, maybe missing their roof. Others just had collapsed walls. Very few had just minor damage. But like I said, this thing hit Tyndall dead on. So as I drove closer and closer to base, the damage just got worse. And so the base, just like the community, was torn apart. Now before I left, we had prepared a base recovery element that deployed up to Maxwell. We also prepared a ride-out element of 93 personnel who stayed on base. Only 2 of those personnel were loggies from the 325th LRAS, a vehicle operator and a vehicle maintainer. So they were not waiting for Major Bowles to show up and tell them what to do. By the time I arrived there at Tyndall, they were already doing everything they possibly could, outside of the bounds of what their AFSCs were. Freeing up fuel trucks, fueling things. I know some of my POL guys are very upset about that. Fixing vehicles, of course, and essentially getting everything in motion. And when I arrived, I simply just became part of the team. I was a vehicle operator for the first 3 days. And that's what it really became about. So we had nothing. The community had nothing. Yet the community showed up at our door and offered support. We didn't even know what to do with it at that point. We had to start figuring things out, and we did that very quickly. And again, like I said, this was not me. They were not waiting for me to do this. So from the very start, each and every logistician, as that number grew, first 2, then 3 when I arrived, then 6, 13, 21, very slowly building. Each and every person came together and did things well outside of their career field, well outside of the normal expectations, and simply figured out how to get it done. And that's what it requires. We didn't have computers, we had no comm, we were using paper if we had to use anything at all. We're simply working together as a team. We were trying to find problems before they became a problem for anyone in the wing. We were trying to reestablish our fighter wing's capability. So before the storm, Tyndall had a pacing unit on it, right? That was my primary objective, to ensure that we could deploy that capability in support of any future war. It was gone. So what did we do then? Like I said, we had to figure it out. And like I said, it was not me. So, some of the things that we did, some of the things that our folks thought of were, you know what? My 2 T2s aren't downloading aircraft right now. Why don't I put them over there with TMO and supply? I have some extra vehicle operators too. Let's solve that problem together. And they did that, and they continued to do that for several months. Then we had Task Force Raptor arrive. And Task Force Raptor was charged with generating the Raptors that had weathered the storm, getting them off the base to a safer location. And so, what would normally be a very uncomfortable thing for an LRS commander, but was not for me because of the circumstances, of course, I chopped my entire supply function. So at that point, I had almost 20 personnel that I had recalled from evacuation. I chopped that entire supply function over to Colonel Moore, who was running Task Force Raptor. Now, I'm not saying that I advocate for that in any future squadron construct, but this worked really well. And what it showed is that these non-traditional responses to these non-traditional circumstances are exactly what's needed. There were other things. The fact that we we had to focus on ground transportation. Our folks were the only people that could provide sustainment and or redeployment from the base. So there was constant shuttling of material, of personnel, from various locations from within the region. That was the only way we could get any form of support. And guess who was carrying that? Our folks. Surely with a lot of help from our regional partners, absolutely, and with a lot of borrowed vehicles as well. We also had to perform vehicle maintenance on the go at all times. So yes, normally we have a mobile maintenance capability, but we were literally doing only mobile maintenance. Like I said, we had to go to the customer. We had to find those problems before they became a problem for them. And we literally had to keep the product mobile, because that's all we could do at that point. And our job was to figure out what was left of the base, assess safety, and then restore operations as soon as possible. So we took what was a traditional squadron, what remained of it, recalled what capabilities we could, and then fashioned out of that a logistics capability that was completely non-traditional and was adapted to its circumstances. And that's exactly what we're going to need to do in any future war. And so when we talk about these multi-role, multi-skill airmen, and I know I'm probably using a word that No. 6 probably doesn't want me to use, or a phrase, but I believe that that's exactly what Tyndall did. Surely we did it out of necessity, but we proved the concept because we had to, and we proved that it could be both effective and safe. And I still do that. So I currently have less than 50% of my required manning. Surely my mission has changed, but because of that, our airmen continue to do these things. They continue to innovate. So there's three major thoughts I'd like to share with you, and I'd like for you to carry with you from this story. And the first is we've got to let our airmen lead. When we say that, I think a lot of people would say that, and they're like, yeah, okay, got it. But what I truly mean is our airmen are far more creative, far more modern than any of us will be. And they're sitting there with ideas. But this isn't just a brand new airman. We're also talking about master sergeants, even senior master sergeants that have been sitting on these ideas or have been sitting in these environments where they've not been allowed to experiment, and now they have the opportunity to do so. We need to be willing to fail just a little bit to give these things a try. Because I guarantee that there's ideas out there that you're not aware of where folks want to do their jobs better. And that leads to my next one. We need to have the right mindset. We need to not be so concerned with that potential failure and be more concerned with how we can do things better. We always have to have that progressive mindset. I'm known, definitely by the folks I work with at Tyndall, and by many of you probably here in this room, for being, I would say, an agitator. I can be pretty aggressive with my opinions and my ideas. And so I have to be careful about how off-putting that is, absolutely. But I think as logisticians, we have to be the ones in the room that ask those hard questions. We have to push the limits, and we have to encourage everyone else to push for things to be better just as we are in our daily jobs. And that's hard, because sometimes we're going to hit a brick wall, and sometimes that's going to really hurt. But if we don't do it, I'm not sure that anyone else will. All right, the last one, and I'm going to borrow a concept that has been borrowed by Richard Clark, national security expert. He borrows Cassandras from the Greek mythology. It's a figure in Greek mythology. And he uses it to categorize people who are able to see the details and data in daily life and what's occurring to then predict or forecast potential problems. What I want to argue for you to consider is that we need to listen to these types of people. Even more than that, we need to be these types of people. I think quite naturally we are. That's what we do as logisticians. But just like we need to listen to the ideas of our airmen, we need to study what's going on and observe what's going on and listen to the concerns, national security, our safety within our different units, and pay attention to those issues and address them. So all too often we tell people they're alarmists, or that's not a big issue at this point. But I think this is a time when we reflect on Hurricane Michael and its impact on Tyndall. We can say, you know what? This may not be a one-off. There may be worse coming. And I think if we begin to look at that science, we may want to take action to prepare for it. All right, so I don't want to leave here without giving you a little bit of pep in your step, because I know Hurricane Michael was kind of a sad story. I want to let you know that we're doing great. I love my job. I want to trade it for the world, and I love love being a logistician. But more than that, if I can do it, anybody can. So I am the denominator to a lot of people's success in this room. You're welcome. But all it takes is a positive attitude. All it takes is a can-do attitude. And it takes a listening ear. And I struggle with that too. But quite literally, if I can do it, you can do it too. All right, well, thank you. If you have any further questions, there's 4 of us here. We are happy to talk about this. All right.